I want to first begin by congratulating your recent election victory, and more importantly, for joining the institution of the legislature, one of the most important democratic institutions that we have in our country. So you're probably at this point feeling overwhelmed, a little, things are coming at you from all kinds of different angles. You might feel equal parts excitement and maybe a little bit of trepidation. But our goal here today, and our goal with this entire series, is to give you some tools and some tactics to help you navigate that first freshman session that you're about to go into, so that you have a better enhanced chance to achieve some of the goals that you campaigned on, the things that you came to the legislature to try to accomplish. And so that's what we're here to do, and let's get started, right? Let's get going. Time is of the essence. So the great sort of legendary negotiation trainer by the name of Chester Karras used to say that in life, you don't get what you deserve. You get what you can either take by raw power or what you negotiate. And so clearly, as brand new legislators, you're not going to take a lot by raw power. And that's even more true if you're in the minority in your particular state. So what you do have the power to do, however, is to harness the skills of negotiation in a way that you can hopefully try to begin the process of solving the problems that you campaigned on, that you came to the legislature to try to solve, and to do so in a way that provides the most optimal outcomes for all stakeholders. The legislature, constituents, other government agencies, the state as a whole can all benefit because of your efforts. So Stacy mentioned what you're about to see for the next 45 or so minutes is a result of a partnership between NCSL and Harvard University and American University to take some of the best practices from the legal and business negotiation realm and put them in the context of the legislature, which we all know is a very particular type of environment to negotiate in. So what we're trying to do is to develop a skill set, some real tangible skills, but also more importantly, I think a mindset that if we do that properly, we can achieve some results like this. I'll let you catch up to that one, and not so much like this. This is what we're trying to avoid, because there are unique challenges to effectively negotiating in the legislature. It's just a different animal than it is in the legal world, in the business realm, or the nonprofit realm, or any other place, the education realm that many of you have spent time already negotiating in. And so I'm kind of interested to know, as we start down our time together today, what you think is unique about the legislature. What is it about the legislature that makes it more difficult or more challenging to arrive at negotiated settlements that solve problems? So I'm going to ask you several times today to activate your fingers, to use the chat box a little bit, to become a participant in this and not just a receiver of this information. So the first is right now, in the chat box, go ahead and just throw in your theories about what makes it so hard. What are the barriers and challenges to effective negotiation in an environment like the legislature? Let me just sort of hear what kind of answers you guys come up with. So I'm looking at that chat bar right now. I know your fingers are working feverishly on the keyboard. Let's hear some of your theories about what gets in the way. Okay, my age. People don't take you seriously because maybe they don't think that you have enough gravitas or life experience. So many parties involved in so many positions, partisan assumptions. Okay, we're getting some good things here. Constituent voices that don't represent everyone, and many times they're very powerful. People are looking for re-election. Oh my gosh, we get so many good things now. Polarization, partisanship, all these things. Very well done. You guys almost completely have covered the things that our research has shown are the real challenges, the big four, if you will, and you've covered them all here. That intense partisanship and polarization that we happen to see all around us today, that sort of puts us in these tribal zones, these silos that make it difficult for us to interact with and negotiate with our other party. The social media fishbowl, this constant scrutiny of everything that we do, and that being constantly broadcast in real time out into the world, that makes it very difficult for us to conduct negotiations in a way that's healthy. And permanent campaigning. You guys just won an election, and you're probably already, some part of your brain is thinking about the next one, fundraising for that, satisfying constituent demands. You are in this constant state of campaigning. And then finally, and this is one that you're going to experience very soon here, this idea that not only are you negotiating, say, against the other caucus or against the other chamber, but within your own caucus, because they don't all think the same, they don't act the same, they're not a monolithic block. So all of these things get in the way of our ability to negotiate effectively. So If we were in a non-COVID or post-COVID world or pre-COVID world, we'd be in the room together, and right now we would do a negotiation simulation. And I'd pair you up, and I'd assign you some roles, and I'd give you a little prep sheet, and you would actually engage in a negotiation, a little warm-up negotiation. And that would provide, A, just a sense of your own natural negotiating styles, and B, some context for us to refer back to and root the principles that we're going to talk about today. Unfortunately, in the virtual world, it's impossible for me to pair you up and get you those materials in a way that naturally gets us into pairs so that each people have a role. So what we're going to do today, and I'm going to admit this is imperfect, is I'm going to act out the simulation that you would have been a part of. I'm going to do a one-man show where I'm playing both roles. Please set the bar incredibly low. I am not a trained thespian. This will not be eligible for Academy Awards. So let me set the stage for you. So imagine that we are at a flea market, and there is a person who has on the table in front of them a number of things, but one of the things is this antique tea kettle. They are the seller in the scenario. And along comes the other person, the buyer or prospective buyer, who has an interest in this tea kettle. The negotiation will play out from there. But here's the roles you would have been assigned. I'm going to let you have an omniscient view here. You're going to understand what's going on in both minds, where if we'd have done this in the room, you'd have only known your own role. But today you get to know both roles. So here are the scenarios that you would have had if we had a chance to actually do this in the room. So on the seller side, there on the left, you see that they're asking $100 for the tea kettle. Now, they bought it for $40. That's the lowest that they are willing to accept for that tea kettle. And by the way, you might want to write these down so you can sort of refer back to these later. The best offer of the day that the seller's gotten was for $55. This person said they're going to come back, but who knows if they're really going to come back or not. On the other side, your other partner, had we been doing this live in the room, the buyer, they know a few things themselves. One, they only brought $70 to the flea market, and that's the highest amount that they are willing to pay for anything, in particular this tea kettle. They also, earlier in the day on a different table somewhere else in the flea market, saw a different tea kettle they didn't quite like as much, but it was only $55. The last thing that I would note if we were in the room together and we were about to do the simulation is that line at the bottom of each of the prep sheets, and that is your goal is to get the best possible deal. And that's the way you define it. Don't let me define that for you. Whatever you think the best possible deal is, that's what you're supposed to do. So on that note, get ready for this wonderful theatrical experience that you're about to see with that information right there in front of you. My, sir, that's a wonderful tea kettle. Very beautiful colors. How much are you asking for it? Well, it's very rare indeed. In fact, it's an antique tea kettle, and I do note the beautiful, exquisite coloring, which is very rare. I'm actually asking $100 for the tea kettle. Ooh, $100, that's way past my budget. There's no way I could afford that. Well, go ahead and make me an offer. Let's see if we can come to some kind of a deal here today. Well, I guess $30, I don't want to be insulting, but $30 is absolutely the most that I could possibly offer. Well, it's far more valuable than that. As I noted before, it's an antique, truly an antique, and we both agreed that it has this very rare and exquisite coloring, but you seem like a very nice person. So I guess just for you, I could come down to $80. Well, earlier today, I saw another one for far less than that, but this one is nicer. I do prefer it. I guess I could come up to maybe $40. Well, I couldn't do that. I've had another person who came by earlier today and had some serious interest in it. And they were offering far more than that. But who knows? They might not come back. And I guess I'd rather take a bird in hand than one in the bush. So I'll come down to $70. Oh, I'm sorry. I could never do that. The most I could possibly, absolutely, my limit is $50. I guess I'm just going to have to go and see that other tea kettle I saw before. No. Don't walk away. Don't leave. You're so nice. I can see that you like it. I want you to be together with this tea kettle. I guess I could come down to 60. I don't know. That's awfully steep. Come on, it's a great deal. It's an antique. Could we possibly meet in the middle, split the difference? How about 55? 55, deal. End scene. Very sorry to have put you through that. I know that that was painful for you, but bear with me. We needed to do that so that you have this context of how the typical negotiation goes. So I'd like to say that I've done this now with hundreds of state legislators, and by the way, with hundreds of legislative staff. And what I just did is almost exactly the same process and, more importantly, the same end result outcome, $55 settlement within a few dollars, in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these simulations. And remember that thing about the best possible deal. When I ask the audience in the room, sellers, how did you define the best possible deal? I generally get an answer like, I wanted to get the most money possible. Buyers, how did you define the best possible deal? And I always get the answer, I've tried to get it for as little as I possibly could. So this mindset and this method is the most common method of negotiation out there in the legal world, in the business world, and unfortunately very often in the legislative world. But as we're going to explore starting right now, it may not be the best mindset and the best method for dealing with the complexities of the legislative environment. For all those things you just put in the chat box, it makes that a difficult way to play the game. So I'm going to introduce you to two cool negotiation terms today. So if you get nothing else out of our time here together, the next time you're at a dinner party or something, when we have dinner parties again, you can drop these into conversation and people will know that you are an expert negotiator. So the first of those two terms is what we call the ZOPA, the zone of possible agreement. And so hopefully you can see the mouse over here. Essentially, you have the seller's desired price, what they're willing to come down to. Of course, the buyer would love to get it for free and what they're willing to come up to. And you notice the ZOPA, that green box, is the zone of possible agreement. That is where the deal potential lies. Sometimes ZOPAs are very narrow, sometimes ZOPAs are very wide. Now I'm going to reveal to you, and you kind of already can sense it from the scenario since I showed you both sides, but this is where I reveal to the audience the ZOPA for the tea kettle scenario. The seller was asking $100. They were willing to come down to $40. The buyer would have loved to walk away with it for free. They're willing to come up to $70. And you notice that we have the ZOPA between $40 and $70. And where did we find a deal? Almost at the exact center of the ZOPA at $55. In fact, at the exact center of the ZOPA, which is within a few dollars of almost every deal, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these simulations. So the thing with the ZOPA is we tend to sniff out a ZOPA. When we're negotiating with another partner, we notice that this ZOPA exists. We're not quite sure what the limits are on, but we know it. Once we know that it exists, it creates this expectation of haggling. And haggling is sort of hardwired into us in the flea market. It's why we don't love to go to the used car lot, because we know we're going to haggle. It's even a part of our artistic expression. Many of you may be old enough to know the great comedy troupe Monty Python. I'm not going to show the clip because it doesn't work very well in the virtual world, but there's this great bit that they do where a person rushes into a bazaar, a flea market, just like we just talked about, and they say, hey, how much for that thing? And the guy goes, $20. He says, sold, and he gives him a $20 bill. And the seller goes, no, we're supposed to haggle. And then he teaches the buyer how to haggle because the buyer doesn't want to haggle. It's so hardwired into the system that the seller won't even take the $20 because he wants to engage in the haggling. And so while this is common, it's also problematic for quite a few reasons that we're going to explore here today. So let's introduce you to the two main types of paradigms of negotiation. On their left, you see the most common paradigm, the paradigm I just acted out, the paradigm that we see over and over again in all those settings I just talked about. It's called positional bargaining. And it's essentially I win, you lose. Every single bit that I gain comes out of your piece of the pie. Every single bit that you gain comes out of mine. We are adversaries. We are warring against each other and trying to defeat the other person. On the right, you're going to see what we're going to spend a lot of time talking about and exploring today, the one we're clearly suggesting might be better for the legislature, and that is this idea of interest-based negotiation. And that is an overlapping Venn diagram. It's not adversarial. We are partners, not adversaries, and we are trying to make the middle of that Venn diagram, the overlap, as big as it can possibly be. But before we jump into just how to do that well, let's at least look at the most common technique, which is positional bargaining, which is what most people do. So what is it? Let's define it first. Positional bargaining is this negotiation strategy where both sides state what they want. It's called the position. They state what they want. I need this, and then that's all we talk about. Every bit of the conversation, every bit of the negotiation is based on those two claims, these two stakes that they made. I like to think of it with this visual metaphor. They're really, both sides are just planting these flags in the ground. I need this, no, I need this. And then for the rest of the negotiation, the rest of the conversation, all we do is look at the flags and we look at these positions that are often irreconcilable. We can't have both of them, and we ignore these things called interests that are lurking underneath the flags. We've been distracted by the flags. We don't see the interest. We're going to talk about interest in great detail here in a few minutes. And once we get stuck in this positional bargaining mentality of looking at the flags, then we engage in what you saw me act out and what you see so often on the used car lot or in the market. And that is what I like to call the dance to the middle of the ZOPA. And what's interesting about that dance is that it's almost preordained. We kind of know where we're going to end up. They planted their flag over here. I planted my flag over here. And you can almost see the middle ground. And you just know you're going to do this little dance to the middle. And this is where we're going to ride. And yet, along the way, we irritate each other. We burn relationships. We do all kinds of things that antagonize the other person, only to arrive at a suboptimal outcome, a place that neither of us wanted to be, because all we're dealing with are those positions. It's what we saw in the tea kettle. It's what we see in the used car lot all the time. So there's a couple of things I want to note about this dance in the middle and why it's problematic. The first is that it always ends up at a suboptimal outcome, the place neither side wanted to be. That's the first thing to note. Second thing is the arbitrariness of the start points, where we plant those flags. Let's go back to the tea kettle. The seller's asking $100 for the tea kettle, but they bought it for $40. That's an incredible markup. Anybody out there that's in the business world would love to have that kind of a margin on the things you sell. The best offer of the day was $55. They sold it for $55. The seller saw one for $55. The market would suggest that tea kettle is worth $55, and yet they planted their flag at $100. On the buyer side, the most they were willing to come up to was $70, but that wasn't based on anything that was inherently valid. It was based on how much cash they happened to pull and bring in their wallet or their purse on the way to the flea market. Had they brought $100, it would have been a different game. Had they brought $20, it had been a different game. And then the last and most important thing for you to note about this dance to the middle, about positional bargaining, is this. If the dance to the middle is the expected game, that's the process we're going to engage in every time, then, and this is going to totally correlate with your observations of the political world over the last 50 years, we have an incentive to plant our flags as far as we possibly can. If we know we're going to dance to the middle, well, then I have an incentive to put my flag as far over here as I can, and you have an incentive to put your flag as far away as you can over there. And once those things become so far out of the way, there's no chance that we can arrive at an agreement, even if we adopt the other framework. So positional bargaining actually incentivizes us to make outlandish positions as our start points. And maybe the best way to sum up the problem with positional bargaining and the dance in the middle comes from a gentleman by the name of Orlando Batista, who says the fellow who says he'll meet you halfway is usually standing on the dividing line. We can't engage in a negotiation strategy that depends on where we started these positions, particularly when we have an incentive to make outlandish claims in the first place. So positional bargaining may be perfectly fine for something like the flea market. It's fast, it's easy, it doesn't require any skill or preparation. But when you think about something as complex as the legislature, multi-party, multi-stakeholder, complex issues, positional bargaining simply is not capable of handling that kind of an environment well. So if that's true, what can we do instead? I'm not here to preach. I'm here to just show you two different options. And the second option, which is what we've partnered with Harvard University and American University to explore, is this idea of interest-based negotiation. The definition's right there in front of you. It's a mindset, not just a skill set, but a mindset, a way of thinking about negotiation that looks for these creative ways to meet not the positions, not the flags flying, but these things called interests that we're going to define in just a few minutes. Those two quotes there, I think, sort of sum up the philosophy of interest-based negotiation. They come from our partner at Harvard by the name of Dr. Brian Mendel. He says it's the art of letting other people have it your way, or writing the other side's victory speech, giving them something to go back and crow about and feel that they got something out of the deal. I like to think of it one step further than that. And it's a spirit of negotiation, which is to deliver, not to deny. I'm going to say it again because I think it's so important to hear it. To deliver, not to deny. That, more than anything, sums up the idea of interest-based negotiation. It's a huge shift from the way that our political systems tend to negotiate these days. And that's why we often find ourselves not coming to agreements too often, rather than coming to real elegant solutions to our problems. And by the way, this is why you joined the legislature in the first place, probably why you ran, because you knew that you could come up with creative ways to solve these problems that plague the citizens of your district or of your state. And that's why you're here. Hopefully this will help you do that. So let me sort of put this into a visual metaphor to understand the difference. On the left, you see positional bargaining, and that is a fixed pie mindset. Every single crumb that I get comes out of your piece of the pie. Every single little scrap you get comes out of my piece of pie. And we are going to claw and fight and burn relationships and piss each other off just to try to get an extra little crumb. On the right, you see the difference, which is interest-based negotiation, where we try to expand that pie before we start to carve it up into chunks. In negotiation speak, we call that creating value before we start to claim that value. So let's do a little math exercise. You probably didn't expect to do a math exercise in an art of negotiation workshop, but look at the pie on the left. Hopefully you can see my mouse right now. Let's just assume this is about 20 units of pie, a 100-unit pie. This person's got about 20 units. This person's got about 80, right? Everybody got that? So this person can scratch and claw and fight and burn relationships, try to go from 20 to 21 and make this person go from 80 to 79. But if you move to the interest-based side, and you think about doubling the size of the pie first, going from 100 units of pie to 200 units of pie, here comes the big aha. Even if we carve it up in the exact same proportions as we did over here, this person now goes from 20 units of pie to 40 units of pie. So they have doubled their take home. The deal is twice as good as the original deal was for them. But here is the catch, and this is an important thing to put in your heads before you get into your first session as a negotiator in the legislature, and that is that the other side also doubles. This person goes from 80 units of pie to 160 units of pie. So in order to really employ interest-based negotiation instead of that cutthroat positional bargaining, we have to change a couple key definitions that have unfortunately been stuck in our heads for far too long. One is that definition of a good compromise. And if we were in the room right now, I'd say, what's the definition of a good compromise? And somebody'd raise their hand and say, it's when both sides are unhappy. And that's kind of what positional bargaining always leads us to. A better definition for a good compromise is one that makes both sides as happy as they could possibly be. But the second definition is even more important. Go back to the instruction that I gave the tea kettle players, which was your goal is to get the best possible deal. And in the old mindset, it's as much as I can get and as little as they can get. I have to beat them. But the new definition, that's a interest-based definition, is I don't have to beat them, I have to beat me. I need to beat myself. That's my only standard of whether this is a good deal. If I can go from 20 units of pie to 40 units of pie, it doesn't matter what happens with them because I have beat myself. I've got a better deal for myself. Look, don't take it from me. Take it from J. Paul Getty, who at one point was the richest private citizen in the history of the world. No one had ever amassed more money than him. You'd think he'd be the most cutthroat negotiator possible, but instead, he advises us this. You must never try to make all the money in a deal. Let the other person make some money too, because if you have a reputation for always making all the money, then you won't have many deals. There are two things you're going to hear from me today as a newly elected member of the legislature that I think just need to highlight, and this is the first. Take this to heart. When you get in there and you start to interact with other people, listen to the words of Getty, because if you always have to win, no one's going to talk to you. His advice is win-win as much as you possibly can so that more people want to make deals with you. So with all that in mind, let's dig in to the actual tangible skills that allow you to be good interest-based negotiator. We're going to look at 4 different principles here today: alternatives, interest, there's that word again, options, and this concept of legitimacy. So the first that we're going to do is alternatives. And this word's used a little bit differently in negotiation land than it is in our normal world. It essentially boils down to, what am I going to do if we don't make a deal? We can't come to an agreement, an arrangement. What am I going to do? Unfortunately, very few people really think very deeply about this question. They just kind of go into it and never really thought about, well, what happens if we don't make a deal? What are my alternatives? So I mentioned I was going to tell you about two cool negotiation terms. The first was the ZOPA, the Zone of Possible Agreement. Here's the second. It's also an acronym. It's called the BATNA, the Best Alternative to a Negotiated Agreement. The BATNA, second cool term. You can drop that in a conversation sometime over the next few weeks. So it goes like this. Sellers want $100 for TKO, they come down to 40, but the buyer's still only offering 35. They're not going to make a deal. Okay, the seller has to think, what are my alternatives? What am I going to do right now if we don't make a deal? They look at all the different alternatives, and the best one is their BATNA. Same thing on the buyer side. They've come up to $70, but the seller still wants 85 for it. They're not going to make a deal. The seller has to think, well, what are all my alternatives? And then the best one is your BATNA. So really quickly, here's your second opportunity to flex those fingers and use the chat bar. Let's think about the seller's side in the TKO scenario. If they don't make a deal with the buyer, what is their BATNA? What's one of the possible good alternatives they have? What's the best alternative they have if they can't make a deal? What can they do if they don't make a deal? I'm going to turn my attention to the chat bar, sell it to someone else. Maybe that other person comes back. The person that came later, maybe a new person comes along and buys it. What else can they do? Is that the only thing they can do? Come on, there's 54 intelligent brands. Go home and sell it online. There we go. Absolutely. Or come back the next week and try and sell it again. They have a lot of alternatives. Whatever the best one is their BATNA. Now let's turn our attention to the buyer. What if the buyer can't make a deal? What are some of the alternatives they have if they don't buy that tea kettle at that flea market on that day? Let's see. I see a few more from the seller side. Go back and buy the other one. This one that they saw in the other aisle, a few minutes before. Ask to throw in a tea towel. Okay, try to get some. Now that person's thinking. That person's a leading candidate for valedictorian right now. We're going to come back to them in just a few seconds. Yeah, go on eBay. Find a new one. Keep the crappy tea kettle you have at home that works. Stop at Target on the way home. Whichever one of those is the best, that's your BATNA. So sometimes you have a very good BATNA. Sometimes in your analysis, you know that if we don't make a deal, I have a pretty darn good chance of coming up with a good alternative. One great example of this is if you're going to buy a new car. You go to the first Ford dealer and they won't make a deal with you, you can go to the other Ford dealer down the street. You can go to the Honda dealer across town. You can go to a Chevrolet, you can go to Subaru. You have all kinds of alternatives if you're looking for a new car. You have an advantage in the negotiation because your BATNA is a good one and their BATNA is a bad one. But sometimes you have a bad BATNA. In fact, an abhorrent BATNA. And I would argue that this is the most abhorrent BATNA you can have, and that is if you are a hostage negotiator. You don't have a lot of alternatives to making a deal with that person that has taken those hostage. You need to keep talking. Your BATNA is terrible. So the key thing here to take home with this first principle is that good negotiators, successful negotiators in the legislature, think about BATNAs before they even start the conversation. Before they sit down and have that meeting with that person that's going to be their negotiating partner, they think, what is that person going to do if we don't make a deal? Do they have a lot of good options or not? And what am I going to do if we don't make a deal? Do I have a lot of good alternatives or not? What's my BATNA and what's their BATNA? And on that note, I'm going to bring up a sort of a shadow principle here. It's not an explicit principle, but it's really an important one. And that is preparation. You're going to hear me talk 2 or 3 times today about preparation in advance. If you just think you're going to walk down the hallway and start a conversation with someone and deal with the complexities of a legislative negotiation to resolve that successfully, you're kidding yourself. You've got to think about these things in advance, and the BATNA is the first place to think. Where is the leverage? Do they have it? Do I have it? What are their alternatives? What's their BATNA and what's mine? So that's the first of our 4 principles today. The second is that word we've talked about several times, but we're just finally getting around to it now, and that's the idea of interest. When I think about interest, I think about it's not the position, the flag they're flying, the thing they say they want, it's what they really want. It's this underlying element. And I like to think of it as the why behind the position. We ask for things all the time, but there's a reason or a set of reasons that we ask for them. That's our interest. And those things are really important. So let me do another visual demonstration of this concept. Positions versus interest. So positions are the things that you can see. This iceberg metaphor tries to sort of tease that out. You can see that. It's what, people say what they want all the time. They make their claims or their asks or their requests all the time. But interests are always lurking a little bit unseen, a little hidden behind the ocean there. And that's the why they want it. So let me give you an example from the business world. Let's say you're a manager and you have an employee who comes in and says, I want a $5,000 raise. Okay, that's a flag flying. That's a position taken. And in the positional bargaining rule, if you wanted to, you could put your flag in and say, well, I can only give you a $1,000 raise. And then you could dance to the middle of that ZOPA in there. And then let's say they get a $2,800 raise. You split the baby in half. You sort of did the Solomon thing, but they wanted 5,000. You only want to give them 1,000. Suboptimal outcome, not what either of you want. But you have now thought about this concept of interest underlying a position, and you start to do a little bit of inquiry. Well, why do you want a $5,000 raise? You start to have a conversation. Say, I need the money. Well, why? I'm moving pretty soon. Well, what's that? Well, I'm going to have some moving costs, some short-term expenses to get my stuff to the new place, and then I'm going to have some long-term. I have an increase in my rent. Okay, still sort of all about the money. But you keep probing. You know there's something deeper down the bottom of that iceberg. I haven't had a raise in 3 years, boss. I feel stuck in my position. I'm not moving anywhere. And then ding, 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 ding. I don't feel appreciated. Now, I want you to notice a couple things here. First, the position is not the same thing as the interest. $5,000 is not the same thing as a lack of appreciation or validation or respect. Now comes the really important part, put a little star next to it. Thus, satisfying a position does not equal satisfying an interest. They're two totally different things. Very often in the world of the legislature, we can't satisfy those positions. It's impossible for us to do it. But if we're wise and we're smart and we employ these principles and we ask these questions and we figure out why they want these things, we start to uncover these other things called interests that we can satisfy. So here comes that preparation theme again. You've got to prepare in advance. You've got to consider, why do they want the thing they're asking for? And frankly, why do I want the thing I'm asking for? What are those interests that are lurking beneath the surface? Let's raise them up and make them conscious in our frontal lobe. And how are we going to do it? What's the method that we're going to use? Conversation. We have to talk and we have to ask why. And don't stop asking why until you've uncovered a few interests that, aha, now I think I can satisfy those things even if I can't give them the position that they've taken. Sometimes they don't even know their own why. Sometimes you have to dig that out of them. They're just so stuck on the $5,000 raise, they haven't even thought about the real reasons that they want it. Eli Broad, famous industrialist of the 20th century, very successful business negotiator, once said, the best move you can make in a negotiation is to think of an interest the other person hasn't thought of and then meet them. Uncover something they didn't even know was the reason they wanted it, and then give them that, because it's very often a high value thing for them and a low cost giveaway for you. So let's practice this. Let's practice our newfound understanding of interest. Maybe some of you out there are fans of HGTV, all these different kind of housing shows. One of my favorite shows on that network is called House Hunters. And in House Hunters, there's this couple and they want a new house, and the realtor shows them a couple things, and they each have a list of things that they want that don't perfectly align. And the house, of course, doesn't satisfy either of those lists. And then they have to choose between the houses, and then they engage in a negotiation. One side's trying to get the house they want, the other side's trying to get the house they want and the things that they want. And so it's a perfect sort of test model of negotiation theory. So let's imagine that we're watching House Hunters, and we see this couple and they're stuck on this issue. One of the members of the couple wants a third bedroom. Doesn't matter how many charming 2-bedroom houses they see at their price point, in the perfect location, with good schools. Doesn't matter how many other things are satisfied. This person's got a position. Wave them a flag. I want a third bedroom. I want a third bedroom. So now in the chat, everybody activate your fingers again. I want you to brainstorm all the possible interests, all the whys someone might have for demanding the position of the third bedroom. In other words, why would someone want a third bedroom? Let's hear and speculate all the possible interests. They need privacy. They just need a place to get away. They're planning to have kids. They're going to expand their family a little bit. They want a home office. The partner's messy. They need a place to shut the doors. Okay, relatives stay over. They want an office. Oh my gosh, junk room. Okay, wonderful. You guys are doing a very good job. Now I want you to think about the answer to this rhetorical question. And that is there a way to satisfy almost every single one of those interests there that don't involve a third bedroom? In other words, can I give them what they want, the reason they want it, the interest, without giving them the position? I think the answer is clear that you can. And the cool thing is that leads us perfectly into our next principle, our third out of four, this idea of options. Options is the reason you joined the legislature, the reason you ran for office. It's finding creative ways to fulfill the maximum amount of total interest that make the most amount of people as possible happy. That's what options are. It's the creative part of negotiation. It takes it from that slog, that battle of positional bargaining. It becomes, dare I say, even fun to match your brain with another person's brain, your negotiating partner, and try to cobble together a number of options that might work to satisfy a number of both parties' interests. It's a different kind of questioning that goes on here, though. It's not the why question. That's to uncover interest. It's the what if we tried this? What if we did this? What would be wrong with this? I like that what would be wrong with line. Good one for you to use as you start to negotiate in the legislature, because the cool thing about that one is A, you're exploring options and trying to cobble together the best solution, but B, when that person tells you, well, this would be wrong with it, and this would be wrong with it, and this would be wrong with it, they are also revealing, back up one principle, interests. They are telling you what their interests are, even if they don't want to lay those cards on the table. Remember, our goal is to come up with the most optimal solution that satisfies the widest amount of interest for all possible parties involved. It's that spirit I talked about earlier, to deliver, not deny. So let me give an example of this that hopefully illustrates the beauty of options and delivering the maximum amount of interest possible. So imagine that two people are going to the grocery store. They both park in the parking lot, they enter through different parts of the store, and they have one thing in mind. Both of them have the same objective, and that is, I need an orange, an entire orange. I need an orange. And they both race back through the store to the produce section. They find the table that has oranges on them. There's only one orange left. They both race and grab the orange. They have a little bit of an awkward tug of war there in the produce section, and they engage in the classic positional bargaining, right? I need an orange. I need an orange. Well, let's do the positional bargaining dance to the middle. Let's do the Solomon cut the baby in half. And they both end up with half an orange. And they walk out the store unsatisfied, because this is a suboptimal outcome. They both wanted an entire orange, and now they're going home with half an orange. It's the old definition of a good compromise, because both sides are unsatisfied. But a whole orange is just a position. It's just a flag. Let's uncover the interest behind that position with that why. Well, why do you want the orange? Well, I need the meat of the orange because I'm making a salad that needs orange slices. Well, that's interesting. Why do you need it? Well, I need the zest from the rind of the orange for the cake that I'm baking. And voila, behold, orange option 2. Far more elegant, completely satisfying both of their interests, a compromise that satisfies the maximum amount of possible interests of both parties. That's what we're trying to achieve with an interest-based mindset when we go into negotiation. Let's practice this technique. We're going to go back to that third bedroom demand. And you had a lot of great theories for why people would want a third bedroom. But let's just say that in your questioning of your partner, you find out what the real interest is. They need a workout space. That's why they want the third bedroom. That's why they're rejecting every gorgeous 2-bedroom house you see. They want a third, they want it for this workout space. So right now in the chat bar, there we go. Gary, you're now jumped to the top of the valedictorian list because you're already one step ahead. What are all the possible things that you could give them that would satisfy the interest of a workout space without satisfying the position of a third bedroom? Gym membership is one of them, but there's certainly other options out there that could do that. What are some others? I can give them a gym membership. What else can I do? You could put it out in the garage. Yeah, absolutely. You could do the basement. Or finish, maybe you haven't finished it already. You could use a corner of the bedroom, throw that bicycle over there, and even if you don't work out, I can throw all my clothes on it, and that'd be great. It's a great storage too. We use the garage. Okay, a bunch of different things there. Perfectly done. Perfectly done. You're getting this marriage of option and interest, cobbling together these perfect, elegant solutions to our problem. The great thing about the gym membership, which is the first one that came up, is it ends up being sort of like win-win-win. So let's imagine that in this neighborhood, the difference between a 2-bedroom house and a 3-bedroom house is $150,000. So when I get a gym membership and a 2-bedroom house, A, my gym membership's like $19.99 a month. I'd have to live for 500 years to come close to that $150,000 that we'd spend for the 3-bedroom house. So A, I get a gym membership. I get that interest satisfied. My spouse gets the 2-bedroom house in the right neighborhood that they want to live in. Their interest is satisfied. And both of us get the advantage of $150,000 less in our mortgage that we can use for our kids' education or trips to Hawaii every year or whatever. It's a win-win-win situation. So to wrap up this principle, I'd say that options is a principle that's probably the most at the root of why you ran for office, why you tried to become and are now successfully a state legislator. It is putting your brain and the brains of others together to come up with the right solution that satisfies the maximum amount of interest for all of your constituents and other stakeholders who are involved. Okay, last principle, fourth principle. I'm going to show you this video. You're not going to hear the sound, I don't think, because the way Zoom works, but I'll just sort of narrate what's happening here. Before I start it, I want to point out one important piece of context you have to know. Capuchin monkeys like cucumbers. They're perfectly fine with cucumbers, but they love grapes. I mean, grapes, they just love grapes. So here we go. Show you what's happening here. So this is this little experiment. So what you're going to see here is the monkey gives the researcher a rock and gets a cucumber. Okay, they like cucumbers, it's fine. The other monkey gives the researcher a rock, that's the task, but they get a grape. And the other monkey sees this, right? They saw them get a grape, so they hand the rock, but they get another cucumber. And they are not happy about it at all. That is a problem for that monkey. So if we're in the room right now, I'd say, why is this monkey so upset? What's going on here? And you'd all yell out, it's unfair, it's unjust. And when you did that, you instantly are on to the fourth and final principle of interest-based negotiation, which is this concept of legitimacy. And essentially what legitimacy means is that we have to have some kind of standards for the asks that we make, for the positions that we take, for the requests that we make, some kind of benchmark that makes sense. One of our negotiating partners at Harvard used to kind of sum up this principle by saying, why that number? You want $1 million? Go back to the person that wanted a $5,000 raise. Why that number? Why not a $10,000 raise? Why not a $2,000 raise? Make the ask be benchmarked to something tangible. Because if you don't, then you've got a problem. So remember when I talked about how positional bargaining creates this incentive to plant our flags as far as we can because we know we're going to dance in the middle. And then I also talked about how often that where we plant them are just arbitrary positions. We're just throwing it out there, hoping that in the end we'll arrive at something that we didn't lose or at least got something out of it. Positional bargaining incentivizes that kind of behavior. Oftentimes, though, as we saw in the TKL scenario, those positions are illegitimate. There's no reason that should have been a $100 ask for the TKL. There's no reason the buyer should only come up to $70. It's arbitrary as to why they do that. One great example of this in all of our personal lives probably is in the housing market, particularly when people are selling their house. They're very emotionally attached to their house. They watch their kids grow up there. They checked off, the growth on the door jamb for their kid. They've had holidays there. They have all these warm feelings. And when they go to sell the house, they price it way too high. They think it's worth way more than the market would suggest. But there is a standard of legitimacy in the real estate market. There is a thing called comps. And comps rein in the playing field. So if a person tries to sell a house like the one on the left for $1 million, you can run the comps and say, look, a house that looks like the one on the right in this neighborhood only sells for $500,000. If you didn't have a standard of legitimacy, if you didn't do your homework in advance and you simply engaged in a dance in the middle, you would pay $750,000 for that crappy house on the left, which is a terrible, terrible deal. So standards of legitimacy rein in the playing field. They limit where a person can even begin a process of negotiation, where they can even plant those flags if they're going to do that. They set some parameters to the conversation of the negotiation, and they rein in those extreme and arbitrary positions that we so often see. So here now, this is the third time I'm going to talk about this concept of preparation. First, you got to think about BATNAs. You got to think about their alternatives and your alternatives if you don't make a deal. Second, you got to think about interest. Why are they asking for the things they're asking for? And why am I asking for the things I'm asking for? And third, you've got to do your homework about having some standards that truly rein in and set some real parameters and a hard concrete wall around the conversation you're going to have. So as you prepare to enter into the legislature, think about yourself in this way as the true car of the legislature. You shouldn't walk on the lot and start to have a terrible negotiation with someone. You come armed with those benchmarks and criteria that rein the conversation in. So what have we learned so far? We've learned quite a bit. We've got 4 main principles in interest-based negotiation. Alternatives. What's my BATNA? What's my counterpart's BATNA? Is it good? Is it bad? How strong is it? Who's got the leverage here? And then we think about interest. What do I really want? Why do I want it? And why do they really want the thing they're asking for? What are those underlying things that we can hopefully use? The third principle, options, to cobble together an outcome or a solution or a proposal that can satisfy the maximum amount of interest, maybe things that are giveaways for me but are high values for them. And then finally, what are the standards of legitimacy that I can bring to the table to rein in the conversation and make it fair? So normally, again, in a pre or post-COVID world where we were in the room together, now we play around with these principles. We'd hand out another simulation, we'd pair you up again, we'd actually put you in a little game where it's a legislative issue and you're going to try and negotiate that and use these principles. Unfortunately, we don't have that capability today, and I'm not going to act out another scenario for you. I'm not going to put you through that, but I am going to talk about 4 tips for negotiating successfully in the legislature. You're about to begin this process. In fact, some of you may have already begun this process, but certainly once session starts, you're going to be doing this almost on a daily basis. So what are 4 things you can do to be more successful at achieving the goals that you set for yourself when you became a legislator? All right, the first, we talked a lot about expanding this pie first, right? I said you double the size of the pie, then you carve it up. Some of you might have been asking, well, how do I double the size of the pie? What's the magic formula for making the pie bigger before we carve it up? Well, the research says there's a number of different things we don't have quite time to discuss in detail today. The biggest one, the one that rises to the surface, is add new stakeholders. If you and a negotiating partner are coming to loggerheads and you can't figure out a way to expand the pie, bring some more people who care about that issue to the table. When you add stakeholders, you add new interests. And when you add new interests, you create more options to cobble together an elegant solution. And I would add a second thing to this. So maybe it's a constituent you add to the table. Maybe it's another legislator you add to the table. Maybe it's somebody from the other chamber you add to the table. Someone else who cares about that issue. The more people you can have in the conversation, the more interest you'll have and the more options you'll have. The second part of this, and this is just a little kind of a part B in it, is it's best if the stakeholder you bring to the table, actually their interests align more with your negotiating partner than they do with you. Say that again. It's better if that stakeholder that you bring to the table actually is sort of seen as their interests as being more aligned with the person you're negotiating with than your own. 2 reasons for that. The first, when you bring them in, you increase this kind of energy and momentum toward a deal because that person wants a deal too. They already kind of like some of the options because it's going to satisfy their interests. But the more important part is your negotiating partner perceives them as an ally. So when they are arguing that the deal should be made, they have that little influence, that little nudge, that little persuasive power over that person you're negotiating with to bring them to a handshake, a deal in the end. I'll give you an example from my own personal life. In addition to doing this, I have you might notice these little pictures behind me of homes. My partner and I have had a home building company in the Denver area for about the last 10 years. And as you can imagine, we build a home and we have a potential buyer, we get into negotiations, and sometimes those things end up at loggerheads, right? Whenever that happens, whenever I feel like the deal can't be made, I always expand the pie by expanding a stakeholder. But the stakeholder I bring in is not my real estate agent, it's their real estate agent. That's the person I reach out to because they have a totally different interest than we might be fighting over. They have their own commission and they want a deal to be made and they're perceived as an ally by the buyer and they create that momentum toward a deal. So the first thing that you can think about, the one thing you can think about as you think about how can I expand this pie is bring more people into the conversation. Tip number 2, don't ignore the quote unquote elephant in the room. When we're thinking about interests, consider their political interests as well. In the legislature, the key interest that the person you're negotiating with cares about the most may have absolutely nothing to do with the actual piece of legislation that you are negotiating about. That's just a sad truth of the game. They may have something that's not related at all to the transportation bill or the budget, totally unrelated. Maybe it's their own reelection. Maybe they want a leadership position. Maybe they need financial support from an important constituent. If you can deliver one of those things, you're far more likely to get traction and movement toward an agreement on the thing you are negotiating about. Remember, the spirit of interest-based negotiation is to write the other side's victory speech. Give them something to go back and be satisfied about. Give them something they really care about that may have nothing to do with the thing you're actually talking about. So think about that elephant in the room, speculate what that thing might be, even through the why conversation, unveil that, and then try to deliver that if possible. So that's tip number 2. Tip number 3 sort of falls under the umbrella of, but what if they do this? What if they do that? What if they do this? What if they keep moving the goalposts? What if we seem like we have a deal, but then they change the terms of the deal? What if they play hardball? What if they walk away from things we've already agreed on? What if they? In the end, it all sort of comes down to this. What if they are being a jerk? And you got to be of a certain age out there watching this to know that that is Steve Martin and that he was in this great comedy called The Jerk. And if you haven't seen it, you should definitely check it out. I think it does stand the test of time. So what if they're doing any of those things that are jerky? I've got 4 responses to that. So the first is, you wouldn't still be negotiating if you or they could unilaterally impose a solution on the other person. If you had all the power or they had all the power and you could just make the solution, so you wouldn't still be negotiating. So think about that premise first. Because you're still negotiating, it means that there are some unfulfilled interests on both sides. We both want more things satisfied that have not been done. So that brings us to point 3. We either keep talking, we keep negotiating despite their jerkiness, or you have to accept your BATNA. And if your BATNA is not a particularly good alternative, if you don't make a deal, remember, BATNA is the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. If you're not going to make a deal and your BATNA is not particularly good, you must keep talking. And then finally, somebody will say, well, what if they won't even talk to you at all? What if they're so in a tribe that they won't reach out? What if we don't have a relationship? What if, they just, when they see me coming down the hall, they turn and run the other way? Well, this loops back to that stakeholder, that new stakeholder thing. Find somebody who can talk to them. There's nothing in negotiation theory, interest-based theory, that says you have to directly be interacting with your negotiating partner. If you are truly in this jerky kind of loggerheads and they're being so rude and obnoxious or won't talk to you, find someone they will talk to and negotiate through that person. It does not have to be a direct line. You can work the dots back and forth through other people that do have that open line of communication. And this leads us to probably the most important tip that I'm going to say of all. In addition to that J. Paul Getty quote about don't make all the money in the deal, if you get a reputation of making all the money, you won't get many deals. This is the other thing that I just really want to highlight for you as new legislators, and that is this final tip. So it brings it all together. Relationships are the coin of the realm. You're not going to get any of this done if you don't have relationships with other people. Why do they matter? Well, they allow us to talk. We can't have these conversations where we ask why, and uncover their interests. Or what if we tried this? Or what would be wrong with this? Where we cobble together elegant options. We can't do that. We can't have trust in the legitimacy standard or benchmark that either side has brought to the table unless we have a relationship first. Absolutely crucial for you right from the get-go to start thinking about who are those key relationships. Who are those people that are the hub of the wheel, who can talk to and interact with and influence other people? If I have those relationships, then I'm able to negotiate way more effectively with a much wider spectrum of the legislature. And if I don't have a relationship, or that relationship is simply broken and that bridge cannot be rebuilt, then find another person who does and negotiate through them, which is still another relationship that you need to have. So, thank you for sticking around through all of this. Now let's wrap up because we've covered a lot of ground today. And let's kind of review what we've interacted with, thought about, and experienced, played around with a little bit. You got 2 choices, as I said before. I'm not a preacher. I'm not here to proselytize for one or the other. You can do positional bargaining, dance to the middle, or you can try an interest-based approach. If you do, you shift from a fixed pie mindset where we're going to scrap and claw for bits of crumbs in the pie to an expand the pie mindset. We're going to try to make it as big as we can before we carve it up. We are going to really try to deliver that spirit of delivery rather than denying, trying to beat them. We're going to move to trying to beat ourselves, no matter how well they do, because if I can do better, it's okay if they do better too. We're going to shift our attention from those flags, those positions that fly, and we're really going to focus on those underlying interests and the options that allow the maximum amount of those interests to flourish. And we are going to treat them as partners in this creative enterprise of trying to solve problems, not as opponents or adversaries. So, last thing, if we were in the room, would be a final exam. I would actually make you do a final exam. I'm not going to make you do it now because it won't work, as you'll see in just a second. But this is what I would do. I would say, hey, everybody, the person next to your table, lock up in an arm wrestling posture. And then I would tell you the rules. I'm going to start my watch for 15 seconds. You get a point every time your opponent's hand hits the table. 1 point every time in 15 seconds. And I'd say, go. And I'd look around the room, and some of you would be failing the final exam. You'd be locked up in this posture trying to win, and nobody's getting any points, or maybe somebody got 1 point. But then I'd look around and I'd see some people get it. Aha, wait, interest-based negotiation, and they'd be doing this, and they do it really fast. And suddenly one of them gets 20 points. What does the other one get? 20 points as well. Deliver, don't deny, be partners, don't be adversaries. Thank you all so much for coming out to this new member orientation training, and hopefully you'll come back for the final two. Congratulations again, like I said at the outside, on your victory and for your efforts to be a successful legislator in this coming session. I am going to, if I indulge you for 1 second on a quick little advertisement, if this is interesting to you and you'd like to know more, you'd like to really dig into it in a deeper way, please send me an email at that address and I will put you on our legislative network. And for sure in 2021, there's going to be a deeper dive, longer workshop hosted at American University by Harvard negotiation trainers using real legislative simulations that you'll actually get a chance to work these principles in the room. So if you'd like to be a part of that, please send me that email. I'll put you on that list. And when that comes around, you'll get invited to that thing. Other than that, thank you for your service. The service that you're about to embark upon, nobody other than NCSL and other legislators, even your own spouses and friends, they don't know the sacrifice that you're about to make, the challenge that you're about to face. We so appreciate that you are spending your time sacrificing so much to try to make the lives of your constituents and the lives of the people in your states better. So you have my deep appreciation for that. Thank you all so much. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so I can actually see you, because I haven't been able to the whole time. I know you're busy. I know you got to go places, so we got to go. Fine. If you want to stick around and ask some questions, I'm happy to stick around for a few more minutes and entertain those. Thank you all. Have a great holiday season and a great first freshman session. Good for you.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. I already see an email in the chat. Tracy, I've got you already. Any questions out there? All right, looks like we're moving on.
I have a question.
Oh, go for it, Heidi, yeah.
So if you find yourself, as I do, in a super minority, which may not be a word, but it's a thing. And so you're in a situation where the other side doesn't really have a need to negotiate ever. I mean, really never. And generally, I think the MO is for them just to take any legislation that looks good and make it their own. Are there any tools that you would introduce in that situation that might be helpful?
Yeah, I mean, this is a problem in a number of states and a number of chambers, right? And in some ways, it's strangely enough a problem on the supermajority side too, because the idea is, everybody thinks, oh, they all think the same and want the same things, but they don't. They have to sort of fight it out internally, in addition to maybe imposing their will on the minority. So in your case, I think my number one piece of advice would be to cultivate relationships with the people in the supermajority who you know share interests with you. Just because they're in the majority doesn't mean that they don't care about test scores, or they don't care about budget deficits, or they don't care about violent crime, or they don't care about a number of things that might overlap with you. And if you can form the relationship with them and show them that, articulate that these are my interests, and by the way, they are yours as well. And this thing that you're about to shove down our throats to make happen because you can actually is in conflict with the maximization of those interests, then you at least have a chance not to probably kill the legislation, but to tweak it in such a way that it's at least somewhat more tolerable or a little bit more beneficial to your constituency that you represent.
Yeah.
So it is a little bit of a couple of these principles put together. One, you gotta have relations, you gotta be able to influence them, to talk to them, and then two, be able to find those overlapping interests that you both have and show them that this thing that they're gonna do is gonna trample upon those interests.
Yeah, that's kind of my inclination too. The other thing is to find things that are very, very pro-business, but just happen to be good for the environment.
Absolutely, yeah, exactly. Finding